Hello, everybody. Happy Wednesday. Hope everyone's having a really great week. My goal for this week is to take a scary word and redefine it for you and turn it into something beautiful. Tonight, I want to talk about exposure. Exposure, one definition of it, is the revelation of a fact, especially one that is concealed or likely to bring disapproval. I'm really thankful for the exposure in my life. 3 years ago, when I got my DUI, I was wrecked. I was riddled with shame and embarrassment. I didn't want anybody to know about it. I was mortified about the tape from the back of that cop car that night. The first thing that I said when I got in the back of the cop car was, God, forgive me for my sins, right? I didn't know anything about anything at the time. I had no clue what actual relationship was, but it's all I had. What followed was just a mess of a lot of cussing. Called a bunch of people. I was a wreck. I was the definition of a hot mess that night. And people I knew were going to see that video. In my mind, I was sure they were basically just going to laugh at me the whole time they watched it. In my mind, I was convinced that they were going to call me names, that they were just going to think I was the biggest fool. And so after that moment, when I would see the people that I knew saw it, or I assumed saw it, I didn't want to talk to them. I wanted to climb under a rock because I was so embarrassed by what I thought they saw. But the exposure of my lifestyle at the time has now brought me into a place of absolute freedom. It led to the finishing act of total restoration of the relationship with my brother. That poor man woke up to a lot of missed calls and FaceTimes from his sister and one ridiculous text message. He called me that morning and he didn't flinch when I said, Tyler, I need you. And he said, okay. It was a let's go moment. No judgment, nothing. It led to a deeper and actual genuine relationship with my sister-in-law, who I can now without a doubt say she is one of my best friends. We have no topic that is off limits. She's one of my humans. It led me to be a more present auntie to my favorite humans. And most importantly, it led me from the literal gutter into the arms of Abba with an encounter of his love for me 3 years ago. And so I'm grateful for it. I want to think of it as like a sliver in your hand. Our physical bodies know when there's a foreign object in it. And so over time, it rejects it enough for it to be brought to the surface so we can remove it. Likewise, our spirit can tell when there's a foreign thing inside of us that's not meant to be in us. The fact that something is being exposed means it's something that was inside of us that wasn't supposed to be there. But the biggest issue with exposure is fear. Living in fear of the exposure that it's going to ruin our careers, our families, our friendships, or it's going to flat out just embarrass us. And I would like to challenge you tonight to pick up the lens of Jesus and re-examine exposure. Exposure is the evidence that the environment is changing. Earthquakes reveal hidden things underground. The Father loves us too much not to expose the things inside of us that aren't supposed to be there. But he also loves us too much to have those things go away before they're exposed. He loves us too much for our issues to be defeated by our own discipline. He doesn't want us to live disciplined lives. He doesn't want us to live white knuckle lives, counting the days. He wants us to live free lives. He wants us to live in freedom. I've come to see exposure as one of the purest forms of the Father's love. Earlier, when I said I now live in total freedom, it doesn't mean without fault. But it does mean that I live without the fear and shame of condemnation after I'm not my best self. I love a good testimony. I think testimonies can, sometimes, add this level of pressure that you're not allowed to mess up, that you're not allowed to fumble in places that you've publicly declared that you've had victory over, right? So that there is this level of humiliation that can come into play where I've publicly said that I'm doing this or I'm better than this now. And so when I don't win in that area, I feel an extra need to hide it. A couple weeks ago, I didn't have my best moment with a couple of my friends. In that situation, something was exposed to me that I didn't like that was inside of me. It exposed something that I didn't realize was still there. But that exposure allowed me to set a boundary to keep that situation from happening again. Boundaries allow us to not plant seeds where we've already ripped out a root. Shame and embarrassment and guilt all lose their power as soon as they're confronted. Light beats darkness 100% of the time. You walk into a room and you flip on a light switch, light wins over dark every time. Shame only lives in the dark and it can't survive in the light. Increased exposure in photography means increased light. The more exposure, the more light. The same goes for our lives. The more things exposed within us that are not meant to be there or don't align with how we were designed, the more we will radiate light. The goal for me is to go through so many moments of exposure that I become one whole being of light. John 8:32 says, "For if you embrace the truth, it will release true freedom into your lives." Now we can come at this from a couple different directions, right? We can literally say, if we embrace the truth, it will release freedom in our lives. If we just become honest, if we just speak the truth, we'll get free from the lies. Or we can take the route that doesn't depend on our own works, on our own discipline. If we embrace the truth, it will release true freedom in our lives. Jesus says in John 14:6, "I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life." If we embrace Jesus, it will release true freedom in our lives. The Mirror Study Bible has that verse, John 8:32, and I really like the way it reads in this one. It says, "In the abiding, you will fully know the truth about who you are, and this knowing will be your freedom." I love that verse. The way they say it, that in the abiding, I abide in Jesus, he abides in me. In that relationship, I get to know who I truly am. And once I know who I am, I'm absolutely free from all the other doubt. All the other things that I used to think were an issue or just part of my personality, that when I'm so connected and I embrace Jesus and I allow that reveal of who I actually am, I have total freedom over anything that's ever tried to hold me down. John 8:12 says, "If we embrace Jesus, we will experience life-giving light. We will never walk in darkness." Embracing Jesus is going to bring exposure. It's going to bring exposure into our lives, and it's going to reveal the real picture underneath. Exposure is beautiful because without it, we don't get to see what he created. Father God created you in his image. And for an image to come into vision, it needs to be exposed. We can't hide a side of ourself and have oneness. We can't give only a part of ourself and have oneness with what we're trying to connect to. We can't have oneness with Father God if we only give him part of ourselves. I encourage all of us to tell Father God, this is the scariest part of my life. This is the unknown part of my life. This is the hardest part of my life. And give it to him. Let him love you through exposure. Exposure is beautiful. It's not something to fear. Let him love you through exposure. I love you. The Father loves you. You're perfectly loved. I'll see you next week. Have a great night.